My name's Isabella. I'm 25 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I inherited something I never expected. My grandmother left me her entire estate, a sprawling vineyard, her successful wine business, and nearly $4 million in assets. I was still mourning her loss when they appeared at my doorstep. My mother and stepfather, the same people who had walked out of my life 12 years ago. They stood there with warm smiles and open arms, acting as though no time had passed at all. "We're still your family," my mother said softly, stepping forward for an embrace I couldn't return. Then, my grandmother's lawyer called with urgent news about my inheritance, and their expressions shifted to something I recognized all too well. Before I tell you how this confrontation unfolded, let me take you back to where it all began. My childhood, at least the part I can bear to remember, was painted in watercolors of ordinary happiness. We lived in a cozy ranch house on Maple Street with a white picket fence that my father had built himself, taking pride in each perfectly aligned board. Mom worked as a nurse at the community hospital, coming home with stories that made me want to help people someday. Dad ran a small construction company with 2 employees and dreams bigger than his bank account could support. Sunday mornings meant pancakes shaped like animals and cartoons watched in our pajamas. Summer evenings brought fireflies and ice cream trucks. Mom would braid my hair while we talked about everything and nothing. Dad taught me to use tools in his garage workshop, patiently guiding my small hands around screwdrivers and measuring tape. "Every problem has a solution, Princess," he would tell me when projects went wrong. "We just have to be smart enough to find it." But beneath the surface of our picture-perfect life, cracks were forming that my 13-year-old mind couldn't recognize. The whispered phone calls that made Dad pace the kitchen late at night. The medical bills piling up on Mom's desk after her breast cancer diagnosis. The way Dad's construction projects started taking longer to complete, with clients calling our home at odd hours demanding updates. Dad had always been an optimist, the kind of man who believed the next big contract would solve all our financial problems. When Mom got sick, that optimism turned desperate. He started bidding on jobs that were too big for his small crew, accepting payments up front to cover Mom's treatment costs, then struggling to deliver what he'd promised. I remember the night I heard him crying in the garage. I'd come downstairs for water and saw him through the window, shoulders shaking as he gripped a wrench like it might anchor him to something solid. Mom found me watching and gently led me back upstairs. "Daddy's just worried about work," she explained, tucking me into bed. "Sometimes grown-ups have problems that feel too big to handle." "Will everything be okay?" I asked. "We'll figure it out," she promised, though her smile seemed fragile as tissue paper. Mom's treatment was aggressive, involving surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. Dad took out a second mortgage to pay for it, maxed out credit cards, and borrowed money from anyone willing to lend it. I learned later that he had even borrowed against his business equipment, essentially gambling our entire future on Mom's recovery. The irony was that the treatment worked. Mom went into remission after 8 grueling months. But by then, Dad's business had collapsed under the weight of incomplete contracts and angry creditors. The house was in foreclosure, and collection agencies called constantly. I tried to help by being invisible. I did my homework without reminders, made my own lunches, and never asked for anything that cost money. I wore clothes from the thrift store without complaint and told my friends I couldn't participate in activities that required fees. I thought if I could just be less of a burden, maybe we could keep our family together. The end came on a Friday in March, unseasonably warm for early spring. I returned from school to find suitcases by the front door and boxes stacked in the living room. Mom sat at the kitchen table with papers spread in front of her, her face streaked with tears. "Where are we moving?" I asked, assuming the foreclosure had finally come through. Mom looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Sweetheart, we need to talk." Dad emerged from the hallway, his face grim but determined. "Isabella, your mom and I have to go away for a while. Things are complicated, but we've arranged for you to stay with your grandmother." I had only met Grandma Elena twice before. She was Mom's mother, a woman who lived alone in wine country 3 hours away. She ran a small vineyard that had been in her family for generations, and from what I understood, she had little patience for what she called modern nonsense. For how long, they asked, though something in their expressions told me this wasn't temporary. We don't know yet, Mom whispered, fresh tears flowing. Maybe a long time. I don't understand. Why can't I come with you? Dad knelt beside my chair, taking my hands in his calloused ones. Princess, we made some bad choices. We owe money to people who might hurt us to get it back. The only way to keep you safe is to keep you away from us. But you'll come back, right? The question came out smaller than I intended. Mom and Dad exchanged a look that answered everything I didn't want to know. That night, they helped me pack 2 suitcases with my most important belongings. Mom gave me a jewelry box that played For Elise when opened, the same lullaby she had hummed when I was little. Keep this to remember that we love you, she said, her voice breaking. No matter what happens, never forget how much we love you. Dad pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. This has Grandma Elena's address and phone number. If you ever need anything at all, you call us. The number on the back will always reach me somehow. The drive to Grandma Elena's vineyard was the longest 3 hours of my life. Dad kept adjusting the rearview mirror to look at me, while Mom twisted in her seat to maintain conversation that felt increasingly forced and desperate. You'll like it there, Mom insisted. Grandma Elena has goats and chickens. You always wanted pets. She'll teach you about winemaking, Dad added. It's a family tradition going back generations. I wanted to scream that I didn't care about goats or wine. I wanted to stay with them, even if it meant danger. But I was 13 and had no choice in the matter. Grandma Elena's property was beautiful in a way that seemed almost cruel, given the circumstances. Rolling hills covered in neat rows of grapevines stretched as far as I could see. The farmhouse was over a century old, painted white with green shutters and a wraparound porch that faced the sunset. She met us at the front gate, a woman in her 70s with silver hair braided down her back and hands stained purple from years of winemaking. She wore practical clothes, jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. You must be Isabella, she said, studying me with sharp brown eyes. You have your mother's stubbornness written all over your face. The goodbye with my parents was devastating. Mom held me so tight I could barely breathe, whispering promises she couldn't possibly keep about staying in touch and visiting soon. Dad's eyes were suspiciously wet as he kissed my forehead and whispered, "Be good for your grandmother. Princess, make us proud." I watched their car disappear down the dusty road until it became just a speck, then nothing at all. Well, Grandma Elena said, picking up my suitcases with surprising strength. No sense standing here feeling sorry for ourselves. Come inside and see your room. Dinner's at 6 sharp, and we eat whatever I cook without complaint. Her directness was jarring after my parents' emotional farewells, but there was something reassuring about her no-nonsense attitude. At least I knew exactly where I stood. My room was simple but comfortable. A twin bed with a handmade quilt, a wooden desk by the window overlooking the vineyard, and shelves lined with books that smelled like vanilla and old paper. The walls were painted pale yellow, and afternoon sunlight streamed through white curtains. This was your mother's room, Grandma Elena informed me. I've kept it mostly the same, though I expect you'll want to change things to suit yourself. That first dinner was awkward but enlightening. Grandma Elena had prepared roast chicken with vegetables from her garden, and everything tasted better than anything I remembered eating at home. She asked direct questions about my schooling, my interests, and my plans. Your parents mentioned you're a good student, she said, cutting her chicken with precise motions. How good? Mostly A's, I replied carefully. Mostly isn't entirely. What subjects give you trouble? Math sometimes, and science. She nodded thoughtfully. The local school here isn't much, but there's a private academy in town that might suit you better. We'll see how you test. I learned quickly that Grandma Elena approached everything with this same practical assessment. Emotions were acknowledged, but not dwelled upon. Problems were identified and solutions were implemented. Sentiment was fine in small doses, but never allowed to interfere with necessary decisions. The first few months were the hardest. I cried myself to sleep most nights, missing my parents desperately, despite understanding intellectually why they had left me. I wrote letters I never sent and checked the mailbox obsessively for correspondence that never came. Grandma Elena never offered empty comfort, but she provided steady presence. When nightmares woke me, I would find her in the kitchen with warm milk and honey, sitting with me until I felt calm enough to return to bed. When report cards arrived, she reviewed them thoroughly and hired tutors for any subject where my grades slipped below her standards. Excellence is a habit, she would say. If you accept mediocrity in small things, it becomes easier to accept it in larger ones. A vineyard became my education in more than just agriculture. Grandma Elena taught me about soil composition, climate patterns, grape varieties, and fermentation processes. But more importantly, she taught me about business, negotiating with suppliers, managing employees, understanding profit margins, and building customer relationships. People think winemaking is romantic, she told me one afternoon as we walked the rows of vines. It's not. It's agriculture combined with chemistry, seasoned with marketing, and sustained by relentless attention to detail. Romance is what we sell to customers who want to believe their bottle holds more than fermented grape juice. By my junior year of high school, I was managing the vineyard's social media presence and helping design wine labels. My grades had improved dramatically under Grandma Elena's exacting standards, and I was taking college-level business courses through the local community college. The transformation wasn't just academic. Living with someone who valued competence over compliance had changed my entire relationship with achievement. I stopped trying to please others and started pursuing excellence for its own sake. Your mother was brilliant, Grandma Elena told me one evening as we reviewed the quarterly business reports. But she was also afraid of disappointing people. Fear makes you small, Isabella. Never make yourself small to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be. For the first 2 years, I waited desperately for contact from my parents. I memorized the phone number Dad had given me and called it periodically, but it was always disconnected. I searched for them online, created social media accounts, hoping they might find me, and even convinced Grandma Elena to let me hire a private investigator when I turned 18. The investigator, a former police officer named Rodriguez, found them within a week. They had moved to Nevada, where Mom worked as a casino dealer and Dad drove delivery trucks. They lived in a modest apartment and seemed to have stabilized their finances, though they were far from wealthy. "Do they know you're looking for them?" Rodriguez asked when he delivered his report. "Not specifically," I admitted, "but they know where I am. They left me here. Want me to make contact? Let them know you're interested in reconnecting?" I stared at the photos he had taken. My parents walking to work, shopping for groceries, living ordinary lives that apparently didn't include missing their abandoned daughter. No, I decided. If they wanted to find me, they would have tried by now. It was a painful realization, but also a liberating one. I stopped checking for letters that would never arrive and began focusing entirely on building my life with Grandma Elena. College presented new challenges and opportunities. I studied business and agriculture at UC Davis, returning home for harvests and holiday breaks. Grandma Elena paid my tuition without complaint, though I knew it represented a significant portion of the vineyard's annual profits. "Education is the only inheritance that can't be stolen," she said when I worried about the cost. "Everything else can be lost, but knowledge becomes part of who you are." During my sophomore year, I met David, a fellow business student whose family owned a small brewery in Oregon Our relationship developed slowly, built on shared interests in family business dynamics and agricultural sustainability. When I brought him home for Christmas, Grandma Elena grilled him with questions that would have intimidated most young men. "What are your intentions regarding my granddaughter?" she asked over dinner, as direct as always. David, to his credit, didn't flinch. "I respect her, ma'am. I enjoy her company, and I think we complement each other well. But we're both focused on our education right now." "Good answer," she approved. "Romantic attachment without practical compatibility is a recipe for misery." David and I continued dating through college, eventually becoming engaged during our senior year. He understood that my future was tied to the vineyard, and he was excited about the possibility of merging our family businesses eventually. After graduation, I returned home to work full-time alongside Grandma Elena. She was in her mid-70s by then, but still sharp as the pruning shears she wielded in the vineyard. I took over marketing and sales, while she maintained control of production and financial decisions. Our partnership worked beautifully. I implemented digital marketing strategies that expanded our distribution, while she ensured our quality standards never wavered. Revenue increased by 40% in my first year, and we began receiving recognition from wine industry publications. 2 years ago, Grandma Elena began experiencing fatigue that she initially attributed to age and seasonal demands. When the symptoms persisted, I convinced her to see a doctor against her protests about making mountains out of molehills. The diagnosis was liver disease, likely caused by decades of occupational exposure to chemicals used in wine production before modern safety standards. The doctor explained that her condition was manageable with medication and lifestyle changes, but the long-term prognosis was uncertain. "Well," she said after we returned home from that appointment, "that explains why wine has been tasting different lately." Her pragmatic response to serious illness shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. While I panicked about treatment options and second opinions, she calmly began reorganizing business responsibilities to account for her reduced energy levels. "Stop catastrophizing," she told me when she found me researching liver disease statistics online. "I'm not dead yet, and when I am, worrying won't change the timeline." The next 18 months brought gradual but steady decline. Grandma Elena maintained her routine as long as possible, rising early to check the vines and staying involved in major business decisions. But she began delegating more responsibilities to me and started what she called transition planning. "The vineyard will be yours someday," she informed me matter-of-factly. "Not because you're family, but because you've earned it. But earning something and keeping it are different skills entirely." She spent her final months teaching me aspects of the business I had never handled: legal compliance, tax planning, insurance policies, and vendor relationships that went back decades. More importantly, she shared stories about building the business from almost nothing after her husband died young, teaching me that success required both vision and stubbornness. "People will underestimate you because you're young and female," she warned. "Use their assumptions against them. Let them think you're naive while you gather information, then surprise them with how much you actually understand." The end came more suddenly than we expected. I found her in the vineyard one morning, sitting peacefully on the bench, overlooking her favorite section of Pinot Noir vines. She had passed in her sleep, looking out at the land she had devoted her life to cultivating. The funeral was larger than I expected. Employees, suppliers, restaurant owners who had bought our wine for years, and neighbors from throughout the valley came to pay respects. Many shared stories about Grandma Elena's kindness and business integrity that I had never heard before. Standing at her graveside, I realized she had become the most important person in my life. She had given me purpose, standards, and most importantly, the confidence to believe I could succeed on my own merits. 3 weeks after the funeral, Robert Manning, Grandma Elena's attorney, contacted me about settling the estate. I had expected the process to be straightforward, since she had often discussed her intentions to leave everything to me. Manning's office was located in downtown Santa Rosa, in a renovated Victorian building that suggested both prosperity and tradition. He was a man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a manner that reminded me somewhat of Grandma Elena, warm but efficient. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his massive oak desk. "Elena spoke of you often, and with great pride." "Thank you. She meant everything to me." "Before we begin," he said, "I should mention we're waiting for a few other parties who requested to be present for the reading." I frowned. "What other parties? I thought I was her only heir." "You are, but certain individuals have expressed interest in the proceedings. They should arrive shortly." 20 minutes later, I understood what he meant. The door opened, and my mother walked in, followed by a man I didn't recognize. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. The woman standing in the doorway was older, thinner, and wearing clothes that suggested financial hardship, but she was unmistakably my mother. "Isabella," she breathed, rushing toward me with tears already forming. "Oh my God, look at you. You're so beautiful." I stood mechanically, allowing her embrace while feeling nothing but shock. She smelled different, like cheap perfume and cigarettes. Her hair was shorter and streaked with gray, and her hands felt rougher than I remembered. "This is my husband, Robert," she said, stepping back to introduce the man beside her. He was younger than Dad would be now, with nervous eyes and the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time indoors. "It's wonderful to finally meet you," Robert said, extending his hand. "Your mother talks about you constantly." I shook his hand automatically while my mind raced. How had they known about Grandma Aleda's death? How had they found me here? "Please, everyone sit," Manning interrupted, his professional demeanor masking what might have been discomfort. "We have a substantial estate to discuss today." As we settled into chairs, Mom moved hers closer to mine. "I know this must be overwhelming, sweetie. We saw the obituary in the San Francisco Chronicle. We've been following news about the vineyard for years, so proud of what you and Elena accomplished together. The implications of this statement hit me immediately. They had been monitoring my life from a distance, aware of my success, but had chosen not to make contact until now." Manning opened a thick folder and began reading the formal language of the will. The scope of my inheritance was staggering. The vineyard and all its equipment, the tasting room and retail facility, distribution contracts worth millions annually, the farmhouse and surrounding 150 acres, multiple investment accounts, and a substantial cash reserve. "In total," Manning concluded, "the estate is valued at approximately $4.3 million. The room fell silent. I had known Grandma Elena was comfortable, but the full extent of her wealth was overwhelming. Mom reached for my hand. "This is incredible, honey. What a responsibility for someone so young." Before I could respond, Robert leaned forward. "Naturally, as her mother, you'll want to help Isabella manage all of this. It's quite a lot for someone with limited life experience." Something about his phrasing, the careful way he emphasized my mother's parental status, set off alarm bells. Manning cleared his throat. "I should mention that Elena included specific provisions regarding Isabella's inheritance. She was quite concerned about protecting Isabella's interests." "Protecting her from what?" Mom asked, though her smile seemed forced. "From individuals who might attempt to exploit her inheritance," Manning replied evenly. "Elena was very thorough in her planning." Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Well, of course family wants to help. As Isabella's mother, she has certain rights regarding major financial decisions." "That's interesting," Manning said, opening another file. "Because according to my records, those parental rights were legally terminated 12 years ago." The color drained from Mom's face. "That's impossible. We never signed anything like that." Manning removed a document. "You signed these termination papers in Nevada family court, 18 months after Isabella came to live with Elena. Elena hired an attorney to locate you and formalize the guardianship arrangement. You both appeared in court and voluntarily relinquished your parental rights." "We were coerced," Robert protested. They threatened to involve Child Protective Services if we didn't cooperate. The court records show you consulted with independent counsel before signing. Manning continued calmly. You also accepted a payment of $25,000 in exchange for your agreement not to contest the arrangement. My mother began crying, but they seemed like tears of frustration rather than grief. We were desperate. We had creditors threatening us. We needed that money to disappear completely. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had sold me. Grandma Elena had essentially purchased my legal custody to protect me from their chaos. Furthermore, Manning continued, Elena formally adopted Isabella when she turned 16. The adoption was finalized through proper legal channels with appropriate waiting periods and court approval. I stared at him in shock. She adopted me? I never knew. Elena felt it was important to ensure your legal security, but she didn't want you to feel obligated to change your surname or relationship dynamic. You remained Isabella Winters by choice, but you became Isabella Santos legally. My mother stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. You can't just steal someone's child because you have money. No one was stolen, Manning replied firmly. Isabella was abandoned, and Elena stepped in to provide stability and care. The legal processes were followed precisely. We came back, Mom insisted. We're here now, trying to reconnect with our daughter. 12 years after voluntarily terminating your rights, Manning observed, and coincidentally, immediately after learning of a substantial inheritance. The meeting deteriorated from there. Mom alternated between emotional appeals about motherhood and practical arguments about family obligation. Robert made veiled suggestions about unnatural influence and elder manipulation. Through it all, Manning remained calm and professional, occasionally consulting his files to cite specific legal precedents. Finally, I spoke up. I'd like to meet with you privately, I told Manning. Of course. Perhaps we could reconvene tomorrow if needed. Mom grabbed my arm as I stood. Isabella, please don't let lawyers turn you against your own family. We made mistakes, but we're trying to fix them now. I looked down at her hand on my arm, remembering how safe I used to feel when she held me. You're 12 years too late, I said quietly. I needed a mother then. I don't need one now. After Mom and Robert left, Manning poured 2 glasses of water and settled back behind his desk. That was difficult, he acknowledged, but I'm afraid it's likely to get worse before it gets better. What do you mean? He opened yet another file, this one thicker than the others. Elena documented extensive research into your parents' activities over the years. She wanted to be prepared for exactly this scenario. The file contained private investigator reports spanning over a decade. Photos, financial records, court documents, and detailed timelines of my parents' post-abandonment activities. Your mother remarried 3 years after leaving you, Manning explained. Robert Henley has quite an interesting background. Multiple bankruptcies, several fraud convictions, and a pattern of targeting women with financial vulnerabilities. I stared at surveillance photos of Mom and Robert leaving a courthouse where, according to the attached documents, they had filed for bankruptcy protection while hiding assets in offshore accounts. Elena had good reason to be concerned, Manning continued. They've attempted to contact her multiple times over the years, always requesting money and always threatening legal action if refused. He showed me copies of letters, emails, and recorded voicemails where Mom and Robert alternated between begging and threatening. They claimed I was being held against my will, demanded grandparent visitation rights that didn't legally exist, and suggested they would expose inappropriate relationships if not given financial consideration. Elena paid for psychological evaluations to ensure their accusations couldn't gain traction, Manning explained. She also hired security consultants who confirmed that some of their threats should be taken seriously. The final section of the file contained the most disturbing revelation, evidence that Mom and Robert had attempted similar schemes with other families. They had researched elderly relatives of young adults, then approached grieving heirs with claims of family connection and legal entitlement. They're professional inheritance hunters? I asked, feeling sick. That appears to be their primary source of income, Manning confirmed. Elena documented at least 4 other cases where they targeted vulnerable heirs with claims of family relationships or legal standing. I sat in stunned silence, processing this information. The parents who had abandoned me hadn't just been desperate or mentally ill. They had become predators who exploited family connections for financial gain. What happens now? I asked. That depends on you, Manning replied. Elena's will includes specific provisions designed to prevent exactly this type of inheritance challenge. But she wanted you to make the final decision about how to handle your parents' return. He handed me another sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma Elena's careful handwriting. I opened the envelope with trembling hands, recognizing immediately the personal stationery Grandma Elena used for important correspondence. My dearest Isabella, if you are reading this, I have passed on, and your mother has appeared seeking a share of what we built together. I am sorry you must face this alone, but I trust the strength I have seen you develop over the years. I need to tell you truths I withheld while I lived, hoping they would never become necessary. Your parents did not leave you reluctantly or temporarily. They sold their parental rights to me for $25,000 and signed agreements never to contact you again. The story they told you about dangerous creditors was partially true, but they were in debt due to new gambling addictions and poor financial choices, not your mother's medical bills alone. The cancer treatment was covered by insurance they never mentioned. More importantly, they have approached me 17 times over the years requesting money. Each approach included threats to disrupt your life or make false accusations if I refused their demands. I paid them twice in your first 3 years here, fearing the harassment might somehow affect your adjustment. When those payments only encouraged more demands, I stopped responding and increased legal protections instead. Every subsequent approach has been documented and reported to appropriate authorities. Your mother's new husband has an extensive criminal history involving inheritance fraud and elder abuse. Their reconciliation with you is not motivated by love or regret, but by careful research into our estate value. I want you to know that adopting you formally was the greatest honor of my life. You have been my daughter in every way that matters since the day you arrived. Not because biology demands it, but because you earned that relationship through your character, dedication, and the joy you brought to my previously solitary existence. I have included provisions that will protect you legally and financially. Trust Manning's guidance. And remember that family is defined by commitment and consistency, not DNA or desperation. You owe them nothing. You owe yourself everything. All my love, Grandmother Elena. P.S. The safety deposit box contains additional documentation you may need, including recordings of their threats and evidence of their other inheritance schemes. Use this information wisely. I finished reading through tears that were equal parts grief and relief. Grandma Elena had protected me one final time, and her letter explained so much about her seemingly excessive security measures and legal preparations over the years. Despite Manning's advice to avoid contact, Mom called me repeatedly that evening. When I finally answered, hoping to establish clear boundaries, her tone was dramatically different from our meeting at Manning's office. "Isabella, we need to talk privately," she said urgently. "That lawyer is trying to poison you against us." "Manning is just doing his job," I replied, executing Grandma Elena's wishes. "Elena was a bitter old woman who resented our happiness," she said, her voice hardening. "She stole you from us when we were vulnerable and turned you against your own family." "You sold me," I said quietly. "You took money in exchange for signing away your rights as my parent." "That's not how it happened," she protested. But her denial sounded rehearsed. We were forced into that agreement. We never wanted to give you up. Then why didn't you fight it? Why didn't you try to contact me for 12 years? We were afraid, she said, tears evident in her voice. Afraid you would reject us, afraid Elena would turn you against us completely. She never spoke against you, I told her truthfully. She let me form my own opinions. Then you know we deserve a chance, Mom pressed. We're still your family. Blood is thicker than water. Elena's blood runs through these vines, I replied, surprising myself with the poetry of it. She earned her place in my life. You forfeited yours. The conversation deteriorated from there, with Mom alternating between emotional manipulation and barely veiled threats. She mentioned hiring attorneys to challenge the adoption, suggested I had been brainwashed against my family, and hinted that media attention might be unwelcome for someone trying to run a business. We don't want to hurt you, she concluded, but we have rights, and we know things about Elena that might surprise you. Such as a way she isolated you from your real family, the way she controlled every aspect of your life. That's not normal, Isabella. That's manipulation. After hanging up, I called Manning immediately. They're threatening to challenge everything, I told him. Expected, he replied calmly. Elena prepared for this possibility. Can you come in tomorrow morning? There are additional protections we need to implement. That night, I walked through the vineyard under a full moon, thinking about the two women who had shaped my life in such different ways. Mom had given me life, but abandoned the responsibility of nurturing it. Grandma Elena had taken responsibility she never asked for and fulfilled it with dedication that transformed both our lives. The vines rustled in the evening breeze, heavy with grapes almost ready for harvest. This land, this business, this life, all of it had been built through decades of careful attention and hard work. I would not let anyone take it away through manipulation or legal threats. The next morning brought news that my mother and Robert had indeed hired attorneys and were challenging both the adoption and the will. They claimed undue influence, elder abuse, and fraudulent documentation. They also filed for emergency injunctions to freeze the estate assets pending investigation. It's a common strategy, Manning explained as we reviewed their filings. Make enough legal noise to force a settlement rather than pursuing expensive litigation. But they have no case, right? Legally, no. The documentation is thorough, and Elena's mental competency was verified multiple times throughout the adoption process. But defending against frivolous lawsuits still costs money and time. How much money? Potentially hundreds of thousands in legal fees if they drag it out long enough. I thought about Grandma Elena's pragmatic approach to problems. What would end this quickly? Manning smiled for the first time since the proceedings began. Elena anticipated that question too. He handed me another document I hadn't seen before. This is a settlement offer Elena prepared, to be presented only if they pursue legal action. The offer was brilliant in its simplicity. My parents could receive $50,000 immediately if they signed agreements never to contact me again, never to challenge the will, and never to make public statements about Elena or the vineyard. The payment would come with strict conditions that any violation would result in full repayment plus penalties. It's enough money to solve their immediate financial problems, Manning explained, but not enough to make this type of scam profitable long-term. And if they refuse, then we present all the evidence Elena gathered about their criminal history and other inheritance schemes. The case becomes not just about your inheritance, but about their pattern of fraud. I considered the options carefully. $50,000 seemed like a small price to pay for permanent freedom from their manipulation. Let's make the offer, I decided. The settlement negotiations took place a week later. Mom and Robert brought two attorneys this time, suggesting they had inflated expectations about potential payouts. When Manning presented the $50,000 offer, their reaction was immediate and telling. That's insulting, Robert protested. The estate is worth millions. We're her parents. Your former parents who sold your rights, Manning corrected. This offer is generous considering your legal position. Mom tried a different approach. Isabella, surely you don't want our relationship to be defined by lawyers and court battles. We could work out something reasonable as a family. This is reasonable, I replied. It's more than you gave me when you abandoned me. Their attorneys huddled with them for several minutes before returning with a counteroffer, $500,000 and a position for Robert in the vineyard's management team. Absolutely not, I said before Manning could respond. This isn't a negotiation. It's a one-time offer to make you disappear from my life permanently. Robert's face flushed red. You ungrateful little... Careful, Manning interrupted. Everything said in this room is being recorded. Mom tried once more. Isabella, we're your parents. We deserve better than this after everything we've been through. You deserve exactly what you earned, I told her, which is nothing. They cut the settlement. 3 days later, Manning presented me with signed documents confirming they would never contact me again in exchange for $50,000. The money felt like the best investment I could make in my future peace of mind. 6 months have passed since that confrontation. The vineyard continues to prosper under my full ownership. I've expanded our direct-to-consumer sales and begun developing a premium wine club that has exceeded all projections. David and I were married last month in a small ceremony overlooking the vineyard. Grandma Elena would have approved of the practical arrangements. A beautiful setting we already owned, local wine we produced ourselves, and a guest list limited to people who had earned their place in our lives through consistent presence rather than biological accident. Manning walked me down the aisle, fulfilling the role Grandma Elena had secretly hoped he might someday play. Mrs. Rodriguez, who has worked in our tasting room for 15 years, caught the bouquet and declared it a sign that her own daughter would find happiness soon. A Henley Foundation for Agricultural Education, which I established with a portion of my inheritance, awarded its first scholarships last week to children from farming families who want to study agriculture or business. 12 recipients will receive full college funding, continuing Grandma Elena's belief that education creates opportunities that can't be taken away. I've discovered that healing doesn't always require forgiveness or reconciliation. Sometimes it requires accepting that some relationships are fundamentally transactional and protecting yourself accordingly. The fantasy of my parents' return that haunted me for years finally played out, revealing not the loving reunion I once dreamed of, but exactly the calculated exploitation Grandma Elena had predicted. I sleep peacefully now in the farmhouse where I learned what real parental love looks like. Not dramatic declarations or emotional intensity, but daily presence, consistent guidance, and protection that continues even after death. The vineyard thrives under my care, each harvest connecting me more deeply to the land, and the woman who taught me that family is built through shared commitment to something larger than ourselves. The vines don't care about DNA or legal documents. They respond to consistent attention, appropriate nourishment, and patience through difficult seasons. Some evenings, I sit on the porch where Grandma Elena used to watch the sunset, usually with David beside me, and our future stretching ahead like the neat rows of grapevines that will continue producing long after we're gone. I think about legacy and what we choose to pass down, not just property or money, but values, standards, and the knowledge that true wealth comes from relationships built on mutual respect and sustained effort. I never received another direct communication from my mother and Robert, though Manning mentioned they attempted to contact several of our business partners with concerns about my fitness to run the vineyard. None of our partners were interested in their allegations, and the attempts only served to confirm that accepting the settlement had been the right choice. Recently, I found a box in Grandma Elena's attic containing photo albums from my childhood that I didn't know she possessed. Pictures of school plays, science fair projects, graduation ceremonies, all events she had attended quietly, documenting my growth, with the same meticulous attention she gave her vines. In the final album, I discovered pictures of herself at various stages of her life, as a young woman taking over the vineyard after her husband's death, as a middle-aged entrepreneur expanding into new markets, and finally as an older woman who had built something lasting through decades of careful cultivation. A handwritten note was tucked between the last pages. Success is not measured by what you accumulate, but by what you create that outlasts you. You are my greatest creation, Isabella, not because I gave you life, but because I helped you discover what kind of life you wanted to build. The note was dated just weeks before her death, suggesting that even in her final days, she was still teaching me, still preparing me for the challenges I would face alone. David often asks about my childhood before coming to the vineyard, curious about the experiences that shaped my sometimes guarded approach to trust. I tell him about the lessons I learned from both abandonment and acceptance, that promises without follow-through are meaningless, that love must be demonstrated through action, and that the most valuable inheritance is the knowledge of how to build something worthwhile from whatever circumstances you're given. We've begun planning our own family, discussing how to raise children who understand both privilege and responsibility. I want them to know their great-grandmother Elena's story, how she took an unexpected responsibility and transformed it into mutual blessing through patience, standards, and unwavering presence. The vineyard will be their inheritance someday, but more importantly, they'll inherit the understanding that family is not defined by accident of birth, but by intentional commitment to each other's growth and well-being. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have looked like if my parents had stayed, if they had fought their demons instead of running from them, but those thoughts no longer carry the weight they once did. I learned from Grandma Elena that dwelling on alternate histories is less valuable than fully embracing the reality you're given. Standing among the vines that will soon be ready for this year's harvest, I understand finally that some gifts come disguised as losses. My parents' abandonment led me to a woman who showed me that real strength comes not from never falling, but from getting up, doing the work, and building something beautiful from whatever materials life provides. The wine we produce here carries the essence of this land, the character of its caretakers, and the accumulated wisdom of generations who understood that the best things in life require time, patience, and unwavering attention to quality. I am Isabella Santos, daughter of Elena Santos, inheritor not just of property and business, but of the knowledge that family is something you build deliberately, carefully, and with complete commitment to the growth it makes possible. Have you ever had to redefine your understanding of what family means? Do you believe that DNA creates obligations, or should relationships be earned through consistent care and presence? I'd love to hear your thoughts about how we choose the people who truly belong in our lives. And if this story resonated with you, remember that sometimes the family we choose provides more authentic love than the family we're born into. Sometimes the greatest gifts come from unexpected sources, and sometimes the most important inheritance isn't money or property, but the example of how to live with integrity and purpose. What are your thoughts on Isabella's decision to cut ties with her biological parents permanently? Do you think she was too harsh? Or was it the right choice given the circumstances? Have you ever experienced a situation where family members returned to your life only when there was something to gain? How did you handle it? Do you believe that blood relationships create automatic obligations, or should all relationships be earned through consistent actions and care? What's your opinion on Grandma Elena's approach to parenting? Showing love through actions rather than words. Is this style too cold? Or can it be more meaningful than emotional expressions? Have you ever had to choose between biological family and chosen family? What factors influenced your decision? How do you think Isabella should handle any future attempts at contact from her parents, if they try to reach out again despite the legal agreements? Do you think there's ever a point where someone deserves forgiveness regardless of their past actions? Or are some betrayals unforgivable? What would you have done in Isabella's situation? taken a different approach to reconnecting with her parents, or handled the inheritance differently? If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments what part touched you most deeply. Have you had to redefine what family means in your own life? I'd love to hear your experiences. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories about overcoming family trauma, building resilience, and finding your own path to happiness. Your subscription helps us continue sharing these important stories that remind us we're not alone in our struggles. And if you know someone who might need to hear Isabella's story, someone dealing with family manipulation, inheritance disputes, or the challenge of setting boundaries with toxic relatives, please share this with them. Sometimes knowing that others have faced similar battles and emerged stronger can make all the difference. Thank you for taking this journey with me. And remember, the family that stays and supports your growth is more valuable than the family that only appears when there's something to gain.